We've got the 10 questions that nobody needs to ask, but everybody does tonight. And we're going to give you some good information and some rants, and we're going to have fun. The fundamental issue with the majority of these questions is that I think most buyers are unable to judge condition or how well a vehicle has been cared for on their own. And I know this is a little bit of a, I guess, maybe a seasoned car dealer, maybe a car snob saying like, oh, well, I know how to call a car and other people don't. But I really think it is that people are making up for their lack of ability to spot paintwork or to see in a car how well it's been cared for, generally judge the condition. And it's difficult to do if you don't do it all the time. It took me years and years to learn what I know, and I'm still learning. So what they do is they use metrics, or we use metrics that we assume have a correlation to the condition, but don't actually. The metrics really only have a correlation to value because we've been told that they should. I mean, look at friggin' Carfax, right? So it used to just have, here's the number of accidents, number of owners, miles, etc. And now it has actual dollar signs with arrows going up and down saying, well, it's worth more because of this and less because of that. But those are all just things on a piece of paper that are interpreted by an algorithm that got a data feed from some government department. Like, do you really trust any of that information? Half the time it's wrong. So we're here to help you ask the real questions that you need to know and kind of get to the bottom of it, cut through all the BS when you're buying a car. The first one, and we're doing this in no particular order, it's just the order that they came to me. The first one, and this is a big one. It is probably the number one dumbest question I get asked, to the point where I don't even know how to answer it anymore without being a complete smart aleck. How many owners? How many owners does a car have? There's so many things wrong with this question. It fundamentally doesn't matter how many owners a car has had, period. I've done studies on this. I can take data from my 20 years in the car industry. This is not an opinion. This is data. There is zero correlation between the number of owners and the condition of a car, period. I've seen 12 owner cars that were impeccably cared for, gorgeous in every way, and one owner cars that were absolute turd buckets. The underlying assumption is that people only sell a car if something's wrong with it. So they think like, oh, well, the more owners a car had, then that means like they were just playing hot potato. And that's a stupid assumption. The second assumption is that one owner is better than two is better than eight, because the longer someone keeps a car, the better they care for, which is complete hogwash. People also apply this on an absolute scale, not a relative scale, right? So the average person of an average car keeps their car for 7 to 8 years. Now, the average high-end car is way lower because they're toys, not tools. So let's say, for the sake of argument, it's 3 years. I would say maybe even less than that in my experience. People are seemingly okay with a 6-year-old car that has 2 owners. But then you get a 12-year-old car that has 4 owners, and oh man, that's too many. And then 18-year-old car, heaven forbid, 6 owners? That's so many. And it's like the older a car is, the less owners per time they want it to have. They can't do the math and say, oh my gosh, that car's from 1980. It's 40 years old and it has 8 owners. That's actually not that many because they all kept it for 5 years. It's just they assume that when somebody's selling a car, there's something wrong with it. And if it's changed hands a lot, then like it's a hot potato. And while that can be true in the extreme scenario, for example, if you look at the Carfax and it's jumped from dealer to dealer to dealer over the past year and a half, and it's remained for sale and never gone to an end user, then you can say, okay, well, it's had a lot of owners in a very short period of time. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of maybe people are trying to pass off a problem. But 7 owners over 10 years doesn't mean anything. And 1 owner doesn't mean anything. You could have a terrible owner, a guy that just ran it through the automatic car wash and never did an oil change, like the average Mustang owner, I guess. So that's just the dumbest one. That one needs to be completely thrown out, and it never will, because Carfax places so much importance on it, and people are just, they're ingrained to think like that's the most important question in the world. And I've literally had people say, I will only buy a 1 or 2 owner car. And I'm like, well, as soon as you buy it, you added an owner. So now it's a 3 owner. So what does it matter? Next question. Was it serviced at a dealer? I think the PPI discussion from a couple weeks ago, pre-purchase inspection, comes into play here and is relevant because we talked about how independent dealers versus franchise dealers will do different types of inspections, and even within those shops each tech is different. I've heard a lot of stories about franchise dealers. I got to be careful what I say. I'm not going to throw anybody in particular under the bus, but I've heard of a Highline European store, which we would expect, okay, they're servicing cars with the proper oil and all the factory recommended stuff. I've heard of a Highline European store using recycled oil out of the giant bins to do oil changes on like under warranty Highline German cars that, they're getting the cheap recycled stuff, and they're supposed to get Mobil 1 synthetic, whatever's in the book. Listen, I'm a car dealer, but car dealers are shady as crap, and they will pull some freaking stunts. It doesn't matter if your car was serviced at a dealer or an independent. Was it serviced, and was it serviced by somebody who knows what they're doing? There's good franchise dealer service shops, there's bad ones. There's good independents, there's bad ones. Like, that is not an automatic this car is good. And even an argument can be made that people who care less about their cars service them at the dealer because they're lazy and they don't know any better. So they just go, well, I bought it here, so I'll just take it to the dealer and service it. And they don't realize that they're getting ripped off or charged for things that aren't being done or don't need to be done or whatever. I got charged like $700-800 for a B service on our Mercedes E350 at the Mercedes deal. I'm like, that's a complete friggin' ripoff. And their 700-point inspection didn't even tell them that the brake rotors were shot, which I could tell from driving the car right just down the street. So, like, you could say that the people who care more about their cars will search out a really good independent and make sure that their car is getting what it needs. But again, there's no hard and fast rule. One is better than the other. It all depends. But that question needs to be totally thrown out. Where is the car from? Or some other variation of that, of like, oh, I see you're in Ohio. The car must be rusty as crap. Asked about a car that's 20 years old and has 7,000 original miles. Yeah, they drove those 7,000 miles in the winter. And oh, by the way, on the Carfax, it showed it lived in California for the last 22 and a half years, and we got it 3 weeks ago. So yeah, it's an Ohio car. I mean, people just don't think. Rants aside about people not paying attention, it seems like a valid question. And actually on Cars and Bids, which is a great auction site, but one of their like subtitles or subheadings they have for cars, they consistently will say where the car lived, which I find to be infuriating because, again, it's reinforcing incorrect assumptions. And half the time it's like it's like, wow, it's lived here most of its life. Okay, well, unless it's been there the whole time, it doesn't matter, because if you put a car in the salt once and then move it to California, it's still going to rust. The underlying assumption, again, is that there's certain regions that are better for cars than others. And that's not entirely true, right? So if you say, well, cars in the Northeast are from Ohio, then it's going to be salty. A daily driver Toyota Camry, absolutely, you can make that assumption. A Porsche, probably not. We have a giant storage facility out back that is full because people are trying to protect their cars and keep them out of the salt. And that's the case all throughout the Midwest and Northeast. People care about their cars. I think a lot of cars from around here are kept nicer because they only drive them 5 months out of the year and they keep them in the garage, and it's a fairly temperate climate. Whereas people that assume automatically a car from California or Arizona or even Florida is a good car. Florida is one of the scariest states to buy cars from because they have constant sun, constant humidity, and people don't actually keep their cars in their garages. They have these carports. So they're exposed to all of the weather that just destroys the outside of the car. It eats the rubber, it eats the paint, and you have like 90% of the state is coast. So people park their cars outside at a restaurant, drive them to the beach, whatever. Yeah, they're not driving them on salty roads, but you have all this salt air that's just rusting these cars like crazy. And in the Southwest, you have dry climate, which again, all of the rubber, all of the seals can dry out if it's not stored in a properly humidified, climate controlled garage. You get sand blasting because you get sandstorms out there. Again, the sun will just beat down on them. California is a good example. People never store their car inside or never think they do because it's always 80 degrees and sunny. Well, that'll kill a car. Making an assumption that because a car is from a certain climate, it's good or bad is a really, really dangerous assumption. You need to know a lot more about the car, and ultimately you just need to look at it because you can tell by looking at it how it's been cared for. This is probably the most dangerous assumption that people make about a car. The next one, have you had any interest or offers? All this tells me as a seller is, I'm not ready to buy. It also takes away your negotiating power if the answer is in the affirmative. So you want to establish yourself as the best possible buyer when you're trying to buy a car. You want to be the best option that that seller has. And you don't do that by getting the seller to think about how much other interest they've had. I mean, it's like going out on a first date and being like, so, do you have other guys that are after you? How are they? No, you're selling yourself. Man, I got prospects. I'm going somewhere. You should go on a second date with me. It doesn't ultimately matter. And the only offer that matters is the one that buys the car. So a guy could have had a ton of interest, but it's all lowball offers. But if you get them to think about that interest, then that takes away your hand in negotiation. Another one that's closely related to that one is how long has it been for sale? Also kind of irrelevant. And there's a flip assumption to that, right? So people think similar to like if a car's been through a lot of owners, well, there must be something wrong with it. People also assume incorrectly that the longer a car has been for sale, the more likelihood that there's something wrong with it. There's a underlying reason about the car that's preventing the sale. That could be the case, but more than likely, it's that the seller is asking too much money or isn't flexible or whatever, and so it's just sat for a long time. And so people think like, oh, well, the car's been for sale for 3 months. Nobody else has bought it, so there's something wrong with the car. And honestly, that's just not true. So it's really not a good question.
Well, like my 996 was for sale for 9 months before I bought it. The reason was because he was asking too much money until I found it. Had nothing to do with the gray interior, not even a little bit. But
yeah, and I advise my consignment sellers on this too because they want to start with some pie in the sky number. Like, oh, well, let's just shoot for this number that's 20% over market value because I'm not in a hurry. I hate that line. And I'm like, the problem is if you don't get an offer, and you'll probably scare people away from making offers because your price is too high, it's going to sit on the market. And then all the people who would have been interested at a reasonable number no longer will be because they're assuming that the reason the car is still on the market is because there's something wrong with the car. You got to lead with your best foot forward, not saying you got to just, start at the bottom, but you got to be careful with how you price a car. The next one, is it on consignment? Now, this typically only gets asked of dealers, but we get this question quite a bit. And I usually just say it is for sale. Now, there is a valid reason for asking this question. If you live in Arizona or Illinois or Nevada, I think it is, there may be a couple other states, but I think it's just those three. If you buy a car from a private party, you are exempt from sales tax. Whereas if you buy it from a dealer, you have to pay sales tax. So I understand that. The problem is a lot of states also regulate dealers. So if they have a car on consignment, they're required to sell the car through the dealership. Even if it's on consignment, these buyers, to avoid sales tax, they want the dealer to basically step out of the situation and allow them to do a private party deal, which could or could not be illegal for the dealer. It's kind of a gray area. Again, it depends how you do it and what state you're in. Aside from that, I get asked that question from people who don't live in those states. And I just I don't know why. I always ask them, I'm like, why are you asking? And typically they think that they'll have more negotiating power with a private seller. This is illustrated in like the fact that if I put up a car for sale myself as a private seller, I get way more people trying to scam me, trying to offer me ridiculous trades, lowballing offers that they don't bother the dealers with because they know the dealers aren't going to, allow them to waste their time. So I think that these people are asking because they're like, well, I want to see if I can take advantage of the seller or offer him or her some crazy trade or whatever. And I'm like, no, you're dealing with me. I'm the dealer. I'm the representative. You don't get to play games with the seller. This is why they've hired us to do this. And we treat consignments just like we do inventory cars. We'll take trades against them. We'll finance them. It's exactly like buying a car out of our inventory. So it really doesn't matter whether or not a car is on consignment. I think people ask that because they think they have more negotiating power too. But again, it's almost exactly the opposite. Consignment cars are typically the ones that the seller wouldn't take a reasonable offer, so the dealer agreed to consign it. And sellers are often more stubborn, whereas a dealer, like they have a fixed cost basis and they're like, if I get a good offer, it's gone. So it's often easier to buy a car out of inventory than off of consignment. Number 7, why are you selling it? This is a really dumb question because you're basically asking the seller to lie to you. The valid answers that I've heard, the best time is when people ask me why I'm selling it. And I think they know I'm a dealer and I'm just like,
because it's my job.
Yeah, to make a profit. Other valid answers that I've heard, but kind of why you don't want to ask the question would be nasty divorce. I hate the car. I'm too old and I can't get out of it anymore. I've been diagnosed with terminal cancer. I can't afford my kids' college. This thing is a British pile of junk and my mechanic earns more than I do. My business is suffering and I need the money. These are awful answers. Do you really want to know why somebody's selling it?
I feel like if you're buying the British car that deserves that response, you should know that it's going to be that bad.
That's true.
That's a perfect response.
I never have to explain anything to British car buyers. Yeah. They're like, I know. I know, I'm friends with my mechanic. He was in my wedding. The point of the question is this car terrible? But if it is, the seller damn sure ain't going to tell you, oh yeah, I've had nothing but problems. I can't fix this car. It's a hunk of junk. So will you take my problem off of my hands? No, nobody's actually going to tell you that. And you're more than likely just going to get some personal story that you don't actually want to hear. Or somebody's going to say, well, I'm buying a car that I like better. Well, what don't you like about this car? And that's personal preference. And you don't want somebody else's opinion of the car you're going to buy because it might be your dream car and they're going to ruin it for you. Oh gosh, I got asked this one the other day. This obviously only is a question that gets asked of high-end cars. Please, for the love of God, people, stop asking this question. What will it be worth in 5 years?
You actually get asked that for real?
I got asked that the other day. It was 10 years, actually. 10 years. What will it be worth in 10 years? If you're listening to this podcast, you probably know how dumb that question is. It's like the post on Driving Enthusiast page about people not getting out of the left lane, like the PSAs. And I'm like, listen, nobody on here is going to... nobody that needs to see this is going to be on this forum. This unfortunate question has been perpetuated by opportunistic dealers and salespeople and collectors, I guess, in the collector car sphere who you love to use the line, it will only go up in value. It's only going to go up in value. I'm not denying that some cars do go up in value over time, but they don't only go up. They go up and they go down and they go up and they go down. You'll never hear this question about a Camry or, for that matter, even a base 911, and definitely not about a Corvette. If the seller knew the answer, one, they wouldn't be in the car business or they wouldn't be selling their car because they'd, have unlimited funds. Because if you had that kind of a crystal ball, then, you wouldn't need to be selling cars. And if they knew it would be going up, they wouldn't be selling it, right? How many dealers have I seen that are like their sales pitch to selling some collector car is, these are the next thing to pop. These are only going up in value. These are, poised for crazy investment potential. And I'm like, if that's true, you wouldn't be selling it. It's like asking a gold bullion salesman if gold is a good investment. It is for them because they buy it wholesale and sell it retail. And that's the same thing dealers do. It's annoying when people use that as a sales pitch on their for sale ad. And it's a question that needs to be thrown out. It's another one that if you ask it, like the last one, if you ask that question, you're asking to be lied to because people don't have a crystal ball. And the guy who even asked that last week, he goes, I know you don't have a crystal ball and you always say that, but what's it worth? What's it going to be worth in 10 years? He was actually asking about whether or not he should sell his car, but like same principle applies. And it's just like, if you're asking that question, you should sell your car because you're only in it for the money. If you like your car, keep it. And if it goes up in value, cool, bonus. If it goes down in value, you won't be that upset. But if your only reason for keeping it is for the dollar, only reason for buying it is for the dollars, it's not a good proposition. Next question. How old was the owner? This question also stems from an assumption that old people are better car owners than young people. Are old people more mature? Sure, they've got life experience, arguably more mature, but that doesn't mean they're more skilled at taking care of a car. Like, bad habits don't necessarily go away, and old people love Armor All, and Armor All's terrible for cars. A lot of old people are also cheap, and they love those Jiffy Lube oil changes on their Corvettes if they actually change the oil. So yeah, younger drivers are known for being yahoos and like driving their cars harder. Like, you don't see boomers at the street takeovers for sure. But it's not a relevant question. It doesn't matter because, you can have old guys that don't know how to drive a clutch and burn it up, and you can have young guys that are really, really care about their cars and take great care of them, and vice versa. So yeah, I think that one should be thrown out as well. The final question that nobody should ever ask when they're buying a car, and this is a hypocritical one because I do ask it all the time, but I'll explain why. What's your bottom line? Once again, you're asking the seller to lie to you because they either don't know their bottom line, and people they can't grasp this principle, right? So with a dealer, it's purely math, right? You pay $85 for a car, you sell it for $90. You know what you have into it and what your profit margin needs to be. With an individual, a lot of times it's emotional. So it's how you're feeling that day, how, what you had for breakfast. And so I might say, my bottom line's 50. But if a guy comes in and offers me 47 cash and I found something else I wanted to buy, or we got a huge bill or something, I'm like, screw it. Let it go. So people don't actually know their bottom line, or they're not going to tell you. And the reason I don't answer that is because buyers are dishonest in asking this question. They don't actually take the answer at face value. They use it as a new starting point for negotiations, or they'll use it to then shop other dealers. So if I'm asking 50 and I say my bottom line's 48, they're like, okay, cool. And then they go look at the other 3 cars they're looking at. Well, this guy will take 48. What's your bottom line? Then they come back to me. Well, how about 46? And I'm like, you're calling me a liar because I said my bottom line was 48. So either I'm a liar or I'm a liar. And I straight up don't answer the question because I've had pretty close to a 0% success rate when that is asked very early on, or if that's the opening question from somebody, I'm like, you're basically just not buying a car. And it's not that I write them off. I will try, but it just never turns out that if somebody calls up and they're like, hey, what's your bottom line on this car, that they end up buying it. I should just give them some guys, I should call their bluff and give them crazy low wholesale numbers and see if they actually bite. But yeah, it's a immediate red flag to me that buyer is not a real buyer. I do use that question with people depending on how I feel them out, because I might be interested in the car and I just say okay, what's your bottom line? And if they give me a number, then I buy it. If they tell me that's their bottom line, I don't go back and say, well, I'm going to give you a different number, right? If I'm going to do that, I'm just going to start out by making an offer and then commence negotiations. But I'm not going to make them be dishonest because I hate it when people do that, to me. So if you are for real and that's your negotiation strategy, at least buy the car when they give you a good bottom line number. But the better thing to do is just make a freaking offer. You know what you want to pay, make an offer, and then the negotiations are at least honest. So dumb question to ask, but I do use it. I'm sorry.